Hello. It's on the 31st. Disability recipients in Ontario received their first check of the new year. It's the hardest. January is the hardest month of the year for people on ODSP because it's, of course, preceded by the most expensive month of the year, December. And in December, ODSP recipients get paid a week early. And so it's, and get the same amount of money as usual. There's no like Christmas bonus or anything like that. And so at basically the second half of January, when everybody's like spent all their money on winter clothes and extra TTC fare and stuff like that to deal with winter, is also the month where the poor people are the absolute poorest. So this is the first day of relief for ODSP recipients. Somebody has leaked the new upcoming like draft version of the new Ontario Conservative healthcare plan, healthcare privatization plan to Andrea Horwath. So like they're drafting this new thing to do to add privatized delivery of service, more privatized delivery to the Ontario health situation. And somebody actually got a draft of it and just sent it to Andrea Horwath, the whatever they are, leader, the third party or opposition or whatever. Yeah, NDP. Wow. With the CBC running all these obsessive things about sleep, it's really reminding me 3 hours is not enough. The head of the CBC, in this sort of big conversation that she's having with Netflix, and like she started bringing up, and people were laughing at her and stuff. She started bringing up things about colonialization in talking about the incursion of like foreign content producers, internet-based stuff, but that are doing real-world production work and stuff like that. And so this is all about the Netflix not paying into the CanCon funding and stuff like that. Which if Hollywood wants to do something here, they end up sponsoring Canadian content, but Netflix doesn't. And so, but she got like laughed at while she was talking about colonialism, and in relation to this, she was talking about the incursion of foreign nationalities on Indigenous locals and stuff, which is it's kind of a weird time to mention colonialism when you could just mention it's just other industrial stuff that's like that is more like that than it's like colonialism. I mean, this is a company trying to pretend that because they deliver their stuff over the internet instead of cable, that they're fundamentally different from the other companies who are doing everything else in the exact same way. When CTV was reporting on this, they reminded everybody that the CBC is publicly funded, as in, they get tax dollars. They didn't remind everybody that the CBC also has to run like oil and energy industry, like dirty energy industry pollutions to pay its bills as well. And it's increasingly strapped for cash, and it's increasingly defunded, and it's increasingly corporatized. And what else did they remind everybody of? Oh yeah, the cost of Netflix. So CTV, the news organization owned by Bell, is criticizing in delivering this news of what this head of the CBC was saying. They're reminding everybody that they're sort of criticizing the CBC along with their reporting of it. It's really funny. So I got some American news as well. So the Saudi government might have helped 5 students from there who are studying in California to in Oregon to escape justice there for like various crimes that they'd committed. And so the Oregonian first picked up this news story, and MSNBC is reporting on it as well. And so one of them, like they like ran somebody over, another person raped somebody, and there's like 3 other people with like other charges. And apparently, like the Saudi government used, consular officials or something like that, like ambassadors or whatever, to kind of like disappear them and like basically jailbreak them from the U.S. And now they're in Saudi Arabia. So this actor, Mr. Smollett, who got attacked in the States recently, for some reason, like the police and NBC are making this big deal about how he doesn't want to give police his phone. So he was like, he's got this business associate that confirms like he was on the phone with him at the time of the attack, the assault. And police can always like pull, phone records and stuff to confirm that phone call took place. But for some reason, they want this actor's phone as well. So this guy that got beaten up, police for some reason want his phone. I can understand why he doesn't want to give it to them. Like, who wants to? Oh, you want my phone? Oh, no problem. Oh, I got beaten up, and now you want to take my phone? Okay, sure, please. And now the press wants to mention that I don't want to give up my phone. And, like, why did I even mention that I'm on this phone call? it's kind of wacky. But America is the place where they can't even have the Super Bowl without it turning into a massive military event. So they've got like helicopters and stuff patrolling, and like the amount of security is equal to that of like a presidential, foreign dignitary visit or something like that. It's like a bigger deal than if the Pope was visiting. But I don't know why I mentioned the Pope. But and then at the same time, everybody's figuring out how to get their concealed carry permits for their 3D printed pistols and you can just have a big ass machine gun there. But then at the same time here in Canada, you can just get AKs and you can get, assault rifles and stuff like that and legally have them and shoot them and whatever. But anyway, so the shutdown in the States while it was going on, one of the things that happened was this pod of seals, and a pod is like what you call like a murder of seals or like a flock of seals, right? A pod of seals, I don't know why you'd call it a pod, a gang, right? A seal gang was basically just acting normal in California on the coast. They like swam up onto the beach and then hung out on the beach and then, sort of like waddled across the road and hung out there and waddled back and hanging on. So just doing their normal SEAL thing, but there's no government workers around to be like, hey, you're trespassed off the beach. Yo, get your horny flippered ass out of here. So they're hanging out on the beach. They don't want to leave. Like, okay. Meanwhile, here in Toronto, it's freaking an ice kingdom here. The kind of dominating factor of these 2 extreme days of like mega cold is the brutal wind coming in from the west, and it's such a crazy effect that, I mean, for cyclists and pedestrians and stuff, well, even drivers, your commute experience largely depended on like which direction you were going and what kind of part of town you're in on these super windy days. But these last 2 days are a good example, just because like at least it wasn't wet, but it was so windy, and that wind was so cold that like if you were cycling into work going east, you'd probably want to be getting on the subway with your bike after 7 when they let you do it again to make that westbound commute. Or if you're driving west and on the highway instead of east, you'd have this completely different wind experience. Or if you're walking around in Liberty Village as opposed to Little Italy or something like that, you'd be in a wind tunnel instead of just on it. So it's really people's experience of this weather has been very different depending on like where they are, where they're going. Where was I going with that? I guess that is the okay. So, but the oh my gosh. So the extreme cold weather makes it like really complicates the emergency services situation, and that came into play when a fire broke out at the Agincourt rec center, and basically burned for like 7 hours. Just because it was so like high wind will do that with fire, but apparently it started in a storm or something like that. The thing is, none of our infrastructure was built for the weather of the past, and we've changed the weather so dramatically that there's basically going to have to rebuild so much stuff and everything and the new stuff is going to be really new to these people. You know, like the new stuff is going to be stuff that some of it's going to be experimental and whatever, but it's we've got just a really annoying period of infrastructure and construction and reconstruction, you know, of like all this buildings, roads, every single piece of the type of infrastructure that we have, the water network, the electricity network, the gas network. My goodness, like every single one of these networks is vulnerable to the ultimate rolling continual terrorist attack, which is basically just our own like I said, destabilization of the climate. It's not really just climate warming, it's whole destabilization. So it's this polar vortex that everybody's hearing about. That's just like the stuff that's normally sort of circling the, you know, it's Arctic air that's usually just sort of circling around the top of the Arctic. But with all these weather patterns changing because of all the pollution that we've, you know, done, and like all the reduction in forest cover and stuff that we've provided, that spot is just going to be wobbling all over the place. So this sort of, if it feels a little bit biblical about the like end time style weather, then it's maybe because the Bible was like a prophecy of what happens when you destroy the earth or something. It's possible that there was some previous civilization somewhere, right, that wrecked the earth at some point, or wrecked Venus or wrecked Mars or something like that, or wrecked some foreign planet, and brought this message to us, and it got turned into some different version. But that's just me in more of a sci-fi type of speculation mode than anything else. But the weather is indeed biblical. It's gonna just get more like this, and it's not really just about figuring out your clothes for the future, figuring out your transportation situation for the future. It's about figuring out your unit in your building, or your room in your house, in your driveway, on your street, and every single little piece of that whole puzzle, and how it is vulnerable in, at every point to the new conditions that we've created. So it's kind of time for everybody to become like a prepper, and then also try to figure out how to support a total turnaround, so that we don't end up with 4 or 5 degrees of destabilization instead of the 3 that we've already hooked ourselves up with, which is already so catastrophic that by the time like any of us are worried about whether we're going to get, whether we're going to die in a senior's home because it's understaffed. There's going to be no seniors home. At least none of the ones that are here now. Okay, moving on. So speaking about senior care homes, the CBC has run this story about them being understaffed, people dying in them because nobody has any time for anything. This is, to me, a big sort of existential nightmare of my generation, is because we are seeing the baby boomers who we're super poor. Our generation, I don't know, the Gen Xers and everybody after that is super, super poor. And everybody before that is super numerous. And so nobody's really made a commitment or found a way to solve this problem. And so seniors already are experiencing kind of torture conditions in their care homes, and the CBC is running a story on some like undercover footage that's come out. There's a number of people investigating this story, and in terms of pollution, so there's about 3,000 like orphaned oil wells in Alberta. So for Alberta residents, a common experience is you either say yes to an oil well on your property, or somehow some company manages to force you into just accommodating one. And then because it's so easy and financially advantageous to just declare bankruptcy in order to avoid the cost of having to clean up, while also cashing out to all their shareholders. I mean, it's the perfect scam. It's like being able to move into an apartment, use it as a grow up or something else that would completely destroy it, and then move out, never pay rent, never pay a damage deposit, and just claim that you have no money, and get away with it. And renters do get away with that. But the difference is when tenants get away with that, they often get in trouble. But in the case of these 3,000 abandoned wells, they didn't. These companies were, Alberta set it up so that these companies could do this without the cleanup costs. So all they had to do was put the wells in, run them, and then cement them in and abandon them. But they're all toxic waste dumps now. So they're totally destroying people's land and stuff. So now finally, now that the damage is done, now that the gig is up, the government has finally decided, and I forget whether it's the Alberta government or the federal government, but the Supreme Court has finally ruled that oil companies can't get away with this anymore. So basically, the specification is that they have to, before they pay out their investors, before they pay out their shareholders, as part of their bankruptcy thing, they have to pay for cleanup costs, and then they can pay shareholders. To me, this sounds pretty weak because it's still not a damage deposit of any kind or anything close to that. And this is why renters have to pay, as a tenant, I've always had to pay a damage deposit as a leaseholder, and also, subletting rooms for like medium to long-term, subletting rental in my own place. And the people that I've known who do that, everybody charges deposits for everything: utility deposits, physical room damage deposits, plumbing damage deposits, and often, a whole bunch of post-dated checks and stuff. And so to me, it's strange that the government isn't simply implementing that. Just, you have to first hire an independent, you have to pay for an independent assessment to be done of the area to evaluate what the damage deposit should be. You have to pay the damage deposit to another independent agency or something like that, a trustee of some kind. And then when you successfully clean up and leave the area, you get your damage deposit refunded. And that would be a fantastic way to ensure that, like, number one, you can recoup some of the costs of cleanup at least, but also that if you play all your cards right, you leave the deal with enough money to either reinvest in something else or do it as a cash out to investors. But the oil companies don't want to behave like companies operating in a regulated but free capitalist market economy, because they're not. We don't have that economy. So Alberta's already wrecked, and now the government's going to implement some very weak provisions that the industry will just circumvent with their next round of stuff. And industry probably wrote this, protective legislation that the government is. They're probably just finalizing it with their industry partners now, so that the industry lobbyists can once again write the environmental protections laws, as we've seen happen all over the world for generations. So at Pearson Airport, airplanes like. Okay, so drivers in Toronto, they like to block up intersections by trying to go through when it's not clear yet. You're not allowed to like enter the intersection when the driver in front of you, hasn't cleared it yet. You're both going straight. You got to wait. You can't block up the intersection, because then if the light changes while you are still stuck there, if the traffic in front of you is not moving enough, then you're blocking the opposing traffic. This happens all the time in Toronto. This happens all the time all over the place. And it also happens on the runways of Pearson International Airport. Apparently 24 times or something like that over the last, I don't know what it was, 2 years or something. This happened. And it could have been, potential accident or something. And so they're getting in a lot of shit for just not running their air traffic control carefully enough, because pilots are like preempting it. They're crossing, because they have these two runways, and then they're connected with all these other little taxiways going across them. So somebody will taxi on one runway and then use the access road to wait, right, to go into like the storage, whatever area, the hangar or whatever, the bay. But then they'll be waiting to cross this runway that is also an active runway. So it allows them to have these two runways and to taxi planes around like super fast, but it involves all this extra coordination, and they're not coordinating it hard enough. I can't imagine if, I'd hate to have a government shut down here and have our flight controllers, low on sleep because of, and food, because they're doing, moonlighting for Uber on the side, because they're already in shit for it. This reminds me of the school bus situation, where I think Toronto Regional School Board was just getting in trouble for their school bus operators being so terrible behind the wheel and being responsible for so many near misses and crashes and stuff in Toronto, and just tons and tons of traffic violations. Like, we have a bad reputation for our school bus drivers, and we have a bad reputation now for our air traffic controllers at Pearson. That's really not good. That's a big deal. I mean, Toronto, I don't know. We want people to come here for conventions and stuff, like not just to set up on the bridle path and trade stocks downtown, for pollution profiteering companies. We want people to come over here. Well, and we want those pollution profiteering tycoons to be able to go fly off to Africa to destroy places over there too, and fly back safely, right? So, wow, good reason to hit up Porter for your flying in and out of Toronto needs. So the government of Canada says it would cost at least $1 billion to extend broadband internet, like fast internet, across Canada's like rural communities, right? And who cares about them now, because everybody's moving from there to the cities. So it's like, in the age of the internet, there became two worlds, the internet world and then the rural world. So that exacerbated the problem of people not wanting to move out there, and also people not wanting to stay there. And then as the population, went down, it just Canada not getting ahead of this downward spiral in terms of flight from rural areas, in the way that they like provide infrastructure and stuff. In the internet age, Canada really needed to make a big push to make this happen, and it needed to happen 10 years ago or something like that, because it's such a crappy situation. But at the same time, as the government is saying it would cost us $1 billion to do this, the parliamentary budget officer says the Trans Mountain Pipeline was $1 billion more expensive than it's worth. So they're like, okay, so you paid 25% extra for this dead on arrival dinosaur, like old world style energy project because no company wanted to be part of it anymore because it's not profitable. It's never going to get built, or it's in question. And so the government just bought it because they love pollution. And of course, got a terrible deal on it because they're so desperate to pollute more. So it's, what would $1 billion do? It costs us an extra $1 billion to do this Trans Mountain thing. We could have gotten broadband to everybody. I want to video chat with, you know, my friends in those places. Like, this is stupid. They're cut off. This is dumb. South Korea has had its Me Too moment in sports, basically because of the international Me Too movement. The female athletes' continual protests of like sexual violence and stuff on the part of their coaches and other, you know, training staff have finally started to make waves, have finally started to resonate a bit and get somewhere. So this is South Korea, and apparently the violence is just brutal, and the predatory sexual behavior is like, at first when I was reading this, I was like, oh, North Korea, and then I'm like, it's South Korea? This is in the world, you know? this is not in the secret kingdom, because the you can't even call them allegations, but the allegations are so credible and they're so extreme. It's really, really cracked out. But of course, it's also a huge victory for feminism, and internationally for us, it's internationally, but a huge victory for feminists in South Korea. So I've been reporting on North American news media really promoting social media as being the culprit behind mental illness in youth, and kind of trying to criticize the main way that that young people, and not just young people, but especially young people, interact, you know, send letters to each other. I mean, it's almost like getting in trouble for passing notes, or getting in trouble for sending letters. I mean, it's like if, I don't know, the first generation of people to have typewriters instead of writing in longhand, because typewriters are so much faster, they get criticized by the previous generation for writing to each other too much and publishing to each other too much, and how everybody has too much information, and that's why everybody's committing suicide. It's not because of the, you know, intense labor rights ramifications of the industrial era that was happening at the same time. Oh no, it's because, and in our situation, they're talking about a generation that is maybe 4 generations into this new age where everybody's like, we're doomed as a species, as a planet. Sorry for giving birth to you. Sorry for destroying the earth. Please fix it for us. I was part of one of those generations where the Gen Xers were telling us, yeah, you know, as our big brothers and big sisters, or whatever, or as our, you know, parents, telling us, sorry about that, or the baby boomers, you know, telling my generation, we are too traumatized and we've messed things up too much, and it's up to you guys now. And now this generation being told, okay, we've got 12 years to do politically impossible things in order to avert total global uninhabitability of the earth. And so this generation of millennials who has grown up with nothing but that, who has never seen a time of, who have never seen a what previous people would call a normal summer. I mean, the first generation who, like, I guess the between the millennials and the baby boomers, or between the millennials and the Gen Xers, was really the last sort of generation that got to experience normal weather and life before guaranteed, this guaranteed existential threat, or while it was coming into emergence in society. And so they take, and also these people who, they're, millennials and everybody after the baby boomers whose labor rights mean nothing. Nobody has access to their labor rights, especially if you're poor, for whom education is inaccessible, for whom mental health services and stuff are inaccessible, for whom healthcare is of very low quality and often really inaccessible to, for whom any kind of income is likely to be much less than their cost of living. For some reason, the CBC, and NBC and Global have all been on this tip about how it's because people are talking too much to each other on social media. It's because young people are sharing too much with each other on social media. So they're putting out all these things. Bell is promoting this Let's Talk thing, but they want you to talk via text messages, and they want you to talk by phone conversations using their service. And they also want you to watch their TV, and they don't want you to, I think, this is my conspiracy theory on the matter, I think it's part of a marketing effort to increase the amount of social isolation among people in a certain way, to increase the isolation between people in the realm of the internet and the realm of them sharing and publishing ideas and stuff, and increase their connectivity with television again, trying to hold on to their television profits and stuff, trying to hold on to their sort of mainstream appeal and their market, because their market is disappearing. So it's basically they're striking back at the generation who have abandoned them because they've made such terrible media. So it's kind of like the baby boomers and the Gen Xers are pissed off about millennials and Generation I or Generation Y or whatever my generation is, between the millennials and the Gen Xers. So they are pissed off at us, I'm going to say, because they made terrible media and they made a terrible telecommunications system. And they also made the internet, and the internet was better. And then we abandoned their terrible systems and used their good system, which unfortunately for all of the companies that they ended up working at, doesn't make them any money. So this is my theory on this, is it's this old generation basically attacking the part of the younger generation's life that they don't trust, the part that's kind of hidden from them, the part that they can't supervise and whatever. So it's very parental. It's very patriarchal. It's kind of this weird thing. But the BBC is also on the tip. So they've run this segment equating the Instagram community with teen self-harm. So what they did was found this teenage girl who she'd been harming herself physically because of mental distress. And on Instagram, she found pictures of, from other people who were harming themselves, stuff that they were posting. And she started posting and sharing with them as well. So she used this online photo sharing thing to go out and find this thing that she was already into, and found a community of people who are also into that. But then the BBC, in interviewing her, made sure to tell the story as if she wandered onto Instagram, got exposed to all this stuff. It escalated her self-harm like crazy, and she had to sort of stay away from it like an addiction. And they use I think the editing is very careful, but they ended up using language like the Instagram community to refer to who she was talking about. So she'd be saying stuff like, I was the Instagram community provided me with this experience or whatever. Now, the Instagram community is just Instagram users. So it's a weird way to refer to the people on Instagram who post about this specific thing that you would have to go and search for to find it. Because I don't know about anybody else, but my Instagram is my friends and my own social network and what they post, and then maybe other stuff that I search for. That's what Instagram is. So it's talking about this technology as if it's something completely different. When referring to it, they say stuff like the community, as they don't say the self-harm community that I found on Instagram. They just say the community, or they say on there instead of saying on Instagram looking for self-harm pictures, or on there with my friends who are also into self-harm and also have this problem and are also sharing about this. They just say on there as in on Instagram, as in Instagram is all, and they criticize Instagram for being like, well, this doesn't violate our community content policy. So Instagram, I guess, has this massively liberal community content policy where they're like, look, we do not feel like modding this. This is the way that people share this is our defense against this being dangerous. And like this, this is my assumption of what their position is on it. They don't want to be mods, and this is the trend worldwide. Facebook doesn't want to be mods in terms of protecting everybody from fake news any more than. Anyway, Facebook doesn't want to be mods. Twitter doesn't want to be mods. Nobody wants to because they're terrible at it. When companies try to formulate and enforce community content standards, they end up cracking down in the wrong places. They end up ignoring the wrong things, and so it's this kind of this guaranteed failure situation in terms of trying to police people's speech. And so the attempt basically on the net is to create systems that, by the way that they're designed, they make it just difficult or useless to spread hate speech or to spread fake news or something like that. So my suggestion would be on this entire issue that these type of content problems, maybe moderation is not the best way to solve them. Maybe the design of the program itself is the best way to solve them. In this case, Instagram can make sure that you're not being randomly exposed to stuff for no reason. By controlling how things are shared, or by not controlling, by designing the app in such a way so that things are shared in a direct interactive way rather than publicly, and if I think it's also an educational issue. We've always had to learn about media literacy, and that's always really been lacking in education. But we haven't done any sort of like self-publishing literacy or online socializing literacy. And it's just some basic stuff, like understand when you're on Twitter, it is 100%, understand how public what you're sharing is, and understand what you're searching for. When you go searching for something and you find it, that's one thing. You have actively sought that out, versus when you are just exploring. The exploration aspect is a little dangerous, because when you're just exploring, you can get exposed to random stuff. And that's the reality of information. But sites like Reddit and stuff, everybody has their own strategy on how to design their way around this problem. And I think maybe through a combination of design policy of the sites and policy of law, this situation could be solved. But meanwhile, the press is just blaming people's problems on their typewriters, basically, the modern version of their typewriters. Okay, anyway, or the modern version of their phones. I mean, this is like parents back in the day being worried about what their kids are talking about on the phone when they can't hear it, and wanting a second phone so they can listen in, and the kids being scared about their parents listening in because the kids might be talking about a teen pregnancy that the adults don't know about, or the kids might be talking about drugs, or the kids might be talking. And the thing is, school and the school situation, the educational situation, and the anti-social media sentiment and stuff, it really seems to be aimed at, or at least have the result of, removing the communication that children and interaction that children and young adults are doing with each other naturally in all the ways that they want to do, and replacing it with some kind of institutionalized messaging or some kind of more formalized interaction. And the informal interaction is absolutely key to people growing up with a healthy, with healthy cognitive capacities, or ready to work with each other, ready to hold a job and stuff like that, ready to have a conversation. The push to isolate young people, I think I'd like to suggest that it is a conspiracy. The other aspect of this is, so in the last 24 hours, the BBC did this thing about Instagram making people mentally unwell. And also this thing about suicide. So they ran the story about suicide where a woman goes back to meet, after almost trying to kill herself by jumping in front of a train, and ends up meeting the train conductor who blew the horn, and sort of that's what kind of made her not do it. Just that one little thing, he noticed her, he blew the horn on his approach because he couldn't stop, right? He was trying to slow down, so, and then he stepped out, and she was walking away, and he tried to talk with her, and he talked with her about suicide and stuff. So anyway, so they run the story, they did this interview with her, they have these things saying, sort of just text on the screen filling in bits of the story, and they keep alluding to the woman and the conductor and the titles and stuff, keep alluding to some kind of recovery that she's done, but there's no specifics of it. The recovery is she's volunteering somewhere, or she's in some course to learn about how to help people in mental health crisis. And and maybe it's just her saying, that's what I'm doing now. And it's the BBC creating it into, and the train conductor creating it into, oh, well, good. Things are good now. You've made this turnaround. Well, you've got something good going on now. And every time the conductor tries to say, oh, well, it's good that you've got good things going on now, it is that vague. He can't mention anything. Oh, it's wonderful that you've got a treatment program that is actually helping you. That's so good to hear. Nothing like that, and nothing even that specific on that level. You would think that they would mention medication. She would say, yeah, I found a psychiatrist and found some medication that worked and got into a therapy group or something. Or you'd think they'd say, just allude to some treatment. They don't allude to any treatment. It's just this one thing. And she doesn't say that much about it. She's super vague about it. But the way that they tell the story makes it seem like something happened. This guy intervened. She made a turnaround. Now people should make turnarounds in their life. They end the thing by saying, for support, go to where? To this thing. But they don't talk about actual support. Meanwhile, people in the UK, as well as here in Canada and in the States, struggle to find adequate mental health support services, the most basic of which would be, I guess, psychotherapy in a verbal setting, just verbal psychotherapy. The most mainstream, common thing that all of us have grown up associating with mental health help is what is not really available. If you have a whole bunch of money, or if you magically find the one affordable or free person that is actually good, then that's great. But if you go to somebody who's affordable, they are basically on some weird CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy tip. And whatever the mainstream is always in some kind of narrow groove of whatever the trending quack psychology is. And right now it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and CBT is garbage. It's basically they just want to do more isolation. You show up, they don't listen to you. They tell you, go through these workbooks. You show up, they don't listen to you. They tell you, have you gotten through the workbook? Why don't you make your way through this one? And then when you do the workbooks, it's really like all the worst non-advice criticism bullshit that you've ever heard, just distilled into some kind of program. So it's basically like all the hurtful things that that people say to people who are mentally ill because they don't understand anything. It's like they got together and agreed on a course of treatment. That's what CBT is like. And that's what you get if you have access to affordable medicine, if you don't have a big budget for it, affordable mental health care. And then if you are going into the realm of private mental health care, you're in the forest, and there's no kind of just normal mainstream talk therapy situation that would come anywhere close to what the mainstream idea of what talk therapy looks like is. It's not available. It's kind of like how the housing market is missing its most popular component, its most popular type of housing. It's like how the transportation network is missing the most popular transportation mode. We've kind of taken the biggest, most popular, most obvious, most useful type of everything and just removed it. That's my kind of evaluation of our age, of our weird societal ages. It's like we took all the stuff that we'd been depending on and then decided we're just so sick of doing everything the same way. Let's just replace it all with terrible ideas. So this nurse who, this personal support worker, speaking of not having enough supervision in like care facilities and stuff, this personal support worker who has already gotten in a lot of trouble for murdering people using insulin, there's actually more victims, it turns out. She actually killed more people than we already knew. And some Paris police officers are getting in trouble for gang raping a Canadian woman who is the daughter of a Canadian police officer or something. And they were hard to take down in terms of like they were hard to go up against and trying to prosecute this trying to investigate and prosecute this because they're known as like total heroes as police there. So they're like these superhero cops with this incredible reputation who now everybody's supposed to believe they raped this woman. And the thing is, they're doing all the classic misogynistic stuff in terms of picking her apart instead of like picking them apart. So they're picking apart like, you told them that you're a police officer too, or you lied to them, and she's had to just endure all this criticism for her part in her rape. How she's basically, treating women as accomplices in their own rapes is the phenomenon that has been perpetuated apparently in this case. So my advice for the cool thing about the weather in Toronto is, like, it was just mega terrible for 2 days there. It's going to be actually nice now. And those losers on the West Coast who have been all like, hey, it's springtime here. Look at the flowers. Wow, it's so pretty. Oh, you guys are in the Ice Kingdom. Yeah, you're about to be in the Ice Kingdom soon. So freaking next time you feel all high and mighty, just remember this. You can't do that outside next week. Okay. So, no, my love to the hosers on the West Coast and everybody who's about to have their weather flipped. But there's a whole bunch of Canadians who, for us here in Toronto, we're about to start enjoying nice, balmy conditions. For those of you on the West Coast, I'm sorry, but you had this coming. You can't be making fun of us with the weather. You polluted too. All right.